July 28, 1841, New York, New York. The city was captivated and horrified by the mysterious disappearance of a girl known to the public as the beautiful Cigar Girl. At just 20 years old, she was a fixture behind the counter at Anderson's cigar shop on Broadway, where her beauty and charm drew in crowds of admirers, including journalists and famous writers. But when she's found dead, her investigation was plagued by false leads, conflicting testimonies, and public hysteria. Men adored her charm. Writers waxed poetic about her beauty, but someone ended her life. This is the Cigar Girl, Mary Rogers, drowned in secrets. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends all the way over there in New Zealand.
We love New Zealand.
Kia ora, kia ora, kia ora.
Well, I thought they just said good day, like everybody else over there.
They say kia ora, kia ora, kia ora.
Gotcha.
3
Hello,
times.
New Zealand. We love you. Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to subscribe to Hitched to Homicide. Then like, rate, and review the podcast so other people who love true crime just like you can find us. That means please go give us a review. Please go give us a like.
Yes.
That helps. That moves us up in the algorithm and helps other people who want to listen to us to find us.
Yes.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below where you can also give us a like and a review.
Mm-hmm.
If you want true crime with us all the time, please go join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws. Go to Facebook, type in H2H, In-Laws and Outlaws, answer a couple questions you're in, go join. I post photos. I'm going to be posting a photo of the most beautiful girl in New York.
There you go.
And other information in there as well. And this week, you're going to want to see it.
Yes.
It's a great group of people, true crime-loving folks. You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And we also have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some caffeine.
Please do.
You can find that link in our show notes. You can also send us a text. The link to that is at the top of the show notes where it says, send Chris and Rob a text.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Robbie.
Yes.
This one goes back a few years.
I love it when you call me Robbie. It reminds me of being young.
You are young at heart.
At heart.
At heart. This one's 134 years old.
Wow.
So I got to see some of my college girlfriends not too long ago, and they listened to the podcast. And one of them, Peggy, love you, Peggy, she told me she really liked the old cases. So this one is for Peggy.
Here's to you, Peggy.
Before we get started, let me thank some sources. Historical Crime Detective, Brown University Library Exhibit, Smithsonian Magazine, Reddit, Wikipedia, Charles Pierce Project, Ghosts of New York, The Skeptical Inquirer, Ancient Origins, City Beautiful Blog, New York Public Library Digital Collects, PoeStories.com, Baltimore Police Museum, Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore, Crime Library, UntappedCities.com, WeirdNewJersey.com, RaisedByNewYork.com, TheSlingsandArrows.com, and Dark Histories.
You didn't do any research on this, did you?
There's a lot out there.
Oh, man. All right, well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Mary Cecile Rogers was born in Lyme, Connecticut around 1821. It's Lyme, New London County, Connecticut.
Okay.
To parents Daniel Rogers and Phoebe Wade Mather Rogers.
I like that name, Phoebe.
Phoebe.
Yeah.
In 1837, her father Daniel died in a steamboat explosion in New Orleans.
Wow.
Mary is only 5 years old. Her mother, according to Daniel's death announcement, was 15 years his senior.
Oh, a cougar.
Yeah, she's a cougar way back in the 1800s. Her dad built the floating dry dock in Mobile, Alabama, which was one of the first in the country. Interesting fact, Daniel's father also drowns in a boating accident between Pequannock and New London.
Sounds like this family probably should have taken up a different profession.
Well, they're sailors.
Okay.
And he was caught in a squall while sailing a yacht brought to America from Russia by Daniel's brother, Moses.
Well, when my family migrated over from Europe, they were mariners also, and they all had like mariner shops on the river in New York. Yeah.
Oh!
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe one of them knew the subject of our podcast today.
They could have very well.
Mary's mother was married before Daniel to Captain Ezra Mather, and with Ezra they had 3 sons, Orlando, who only lived 2 years, Robert, and Frederick. It's unclear to me how he died, Phoebe's first husband, but there's an old letter he wrote to his employers because he's also a seafaring man. Mm-hmm. He was captain of a cargo ship where he'd been captured by pirates.
Oh, wow.
He died in 1808.
Yeah, the reason they didn't talk about it because he died in a bathtub, and it just wasn't very dignified.
But they found all these letters that he had written, basically saying I read it. They've seized the cargo.
Oh wow! So he disappeared after the pirates took control.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, he disappeared after the pirates took control, but the pirates were holding him captive, and he was writing letters home. Yeah. Basically to his employer saying, I'm sorry, they've seized all of the cargo.
Sorry, I'm going to die. Wow.
Phoebe marries Daniel Rogers in 1814, and they have Mary in 1821. But when Daniel dies, Phoebe was strapped for cash, and she and Mary moved to Manhattan, earning a living for herself and her pretty little girl Mary by opening their home and conducting it as a boarding house. A lodging house at 126 Nassau Street in Manhattan. It's downtown, maybe just a block away from City Hall. And the good thing about New York is it hasn't really changed. Yeah. It really hasn't changed that much.
Yeah, exactly.
As she got older, Mary helped her mother around the boarding house, and she grew more and more beautiful with every year. She was tall, she was brunette with a beautiful complexion, and because she was around people all the time growing up in this boarding house, she was really good with people. She was charming. She had a lot of friends and a lot of admirers. She attracted attention wherever she went. She was a head turner, and perhaps because there were so many people in and out of their boarding house, men, the house is near Wall Street, and perhaps these men all smoked cigars. Somehow, John Anderson, who was a successful entrepreneur who owned a very prominent tobacco shop called John Anderson's Tobacco Emporium at the corner of Broadway and Liberty Street, which is also close to City Hall, John meets Mary after he's heard so many things about her striking beauty. I've also read it was Broadway and Thomas Street, and I was curious. And it's because of the street number, 321 Broadway isn't at the corner of Liberty. It's at the corner of Thomas Street. And I looked it up, and the street numbers on Broadway did change on Thomas Street, where a new section was numbered from Church to Broadway. So Broadway was completely renumbered in 1878.
Gotcha.
I, of course, wanted to see it on Google if the building was still there. It's not.
Okay.
Because there's so many old buildings in New York.
Yeah.
But John Anderson sees and meets Mary, and he thinks she's funny and witty and beautiful, and he's no dummy. He thought that if he employed her at the tobacco shop, she would bring in customers.
Yeah.
So in the spring of 1840, when Mary is 20 years old, John goes to Mary's mother and makes her a proposition. Allow Mary to come and work as a clerk in my store. And Phoebe isn't all that keen on the idea because many young men of ill reputation would meet up at the tobacco store and hang out and smoke. But somehow he talked Mary's mother into allowing her to come and work for him. And part of that deal was John walked Mary home every single day after the shop closed.
Got it.
In all honesty, I'm sure they needed the money.
Yeah.
I did read where Mary's father's family was not happy about this at all. John Anderson was so right As soon as Mary started working there and interacting with the patrons of his store, more and more men were coming in to see Mary and buy their tobacco from John. You gotta have a gimmick.
Yeah.
And Mary was John's gimmick.
Nice.
The cigar shop was a hangout of many literary figures and newspaper men. Edgar Allan Poe would frequent the shop. Fenimore Cooper, who wrote among other things, The Last of the Mohicans,
Yeah.
he was there.
Wow.
And he was really considered the first major American novelist. Washington Irving, who wrote Rip Van Winkle and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, he also hangs out at the
grief.
cigar shop.
It's like a who's who.
Yeah. And I didn't realize this, but he also wrote an extensive biography of George Washington. And Fitz Green Halleck, the poet and Byron scholar, he hangs out there as well. He was also more than just a poet. He was the private secretary of John Jacob Astor.
Oh, wow.
And all of these men were writers, with the exception of Edgar. They were members of the Knickerbocker Group. By the way, they named themselves this after Washington Irving's pen name, which was Dietrich Knickerbocker. But for the record, a knickerbocker refers to the loose-fitting trousers worn by the Dutch settlers in New York. It's like the original New Yorkers. They're the OGs.
Yeah.
And that's why the basketball team is named
The
the
Knickerbockers.
Knicks. Yeah, the New York Knicks.
Yep.
But Fitz Green Halleck was so taken with Mary that he wrote a poem about her. And Poe wrote a book. But more about that later.
Okay.
But Mary's always careful not to give anybody the wrong idea. She was modest. She would lavish her beautiful smile on all these men, but she didn't hesitate to be like, you can look, but you don't touch.
You got to give me 6 feet. Sorry.
Yeah. Look, but don't touch. Yeah. She repelled any and all undue advances.
Right.
I'm not that kind of girl. But I read that men would come to the cigar shop and linger all day just to stare at her. And I am going to post this picture, and some of you might be like, what?
Okay.
Now, Mary did have boyfriends in her life. One of them lived at her mother's boarding house, where those men were also taken by her charm and beauty. And his name is Daniel Payne. Daniel was sometimes employed as a cork cutter, like making corks to go inside bottles.
That's a really unfortunate name, too.
Daniel Payne?
Yeah, because, somebody say, he's a real pain.
No, he's Daniel Payne. He's Danny. But he worked at 47 John Street, and apparently cork cutting isn't a great occupation. It's a blue-collar job, but he was a hardworking man. He was prone to depression, probably because he felt like he was caught in a no-end job. Mm-hmm. But he loved Mary very much. And you have to wonder how he felt about all those men ogling Mary all day long, because you men folk seem to be a little possessive. Just saying. Then one day, after Mary becomes a fixture at the cigar shop in January of 1841, Mary the cigar girl with the, quote, dainty figure and pretty face, end quote, didn't show up to work. Her mother discovered what looked like a suicide note, and the New York Sun reported that the coroner had examined the letter and concluded the author had a, quote, fixed and unaltered determination to destroy herself, end quote. Let me tell you what, we talk about the media.
Yeah.
The papers back then were so sensational. They wrote anything and everything.
They were a bit flowery.
Yeah. A week later, Mary comes home. She's alive and well, and she tells her mother she was just visiting a friend in Brooklyn. And the Sun, the New York Sun, was accused of manufacturing Mary's disappearance in order to sell papers. And John Anderson was also thought to be in on the whole scheme, because when Mary came back to the shop, business was a-booming. But something was off. When she comes back to work, she looked fine, but her cheery smile and her wit are a little dim. They've gone a little dim. She's not as bright as she was before.
Okay.
Mary looked a little sad. And according to many sources, when she was asked where she'd been, she abruptly explained that she'd been visiting with friends and relatives in the country. Relatives in the country. She was in Brooklyn. And I guess in 1841, Brooklyn was a little bit of country living, but it was already developing into a bustling suburb.
Gotcha.
But when Mary returns, John and her mother give the same explanation as Mary. And there are those who have speculated that she was off getting an abortion. Mm. There were many rumors. Another was that she had been seen in Manhattan with a tall, handsome naval officer during the time she was supposed to be in the country. Who knows if that's true? The affair blows over, and Mary settled back into her role as an object of admiration for New York's literary and newspaper crew.
You mean they were just all hanging out at the cigar shop? Didn't any of these guys work, or when did they write books?
Yeah, when did they write? Yeah. No, they're just hanging out at the cigar shop, telling each other how great they are and smoking stogies.
Nice.
She gets engaged to Daniel Payne, the cork cutter. Mm-hmm. But Daniel isn't the first person to ask for Mary's hand. Alfred Comlin was a boarder at the Rogers family boarding house. He was a law clerk, which made him a very desirable match in the eyes of many. Mm-hmm. Alfred was infatuated with Mary and proposed to her several times, but Mary had many suitors and consistently refused all the marriage proposals, not just Alfred's. God love her. Yeah. She's got them coming at her left, right, and center.
Yep.
The rivalry between Alfred and Daniel was well known because they both live in the boarding house. Think about this.
Sure.
But Mary's choice reflected her attraction to Daniel's personality over Alfred's stability and status. And Alfred stormed out of the house after witnessing Mary and Daniel engaged in what he considered indiscreet behavior before she accepted his marriage proposal.
She kissed him.
That's what I'm thinking. They're making out in the hall. He's like copping a feel.
Yeah.
Pulling up her skirts.
Yeah, stop.
Sorry, I've been writing a romance novel. And when he acted like a butthead, when Alfred acts like a butthead, Mary really knew, I made the right decision. I didn't want to marry you, especially now that I know how you're going to act.
Right.
But when she does accept Daniel's proposal, Alfred leaves the boarding house, slams the door. But Alfred really did love Mary, and he continued to love Mary, and he would always worry about her. When he left, he told her to contact him if she ever felt like she was in danger. He, quote, assured Mary and her mother that his feelings were indestructible and eternal, and that if they ever needed him, they should not hesitate to call upon him, end quote.
I just can't imagine telling someone, my feelings for you are indestructible.
Yeah.
In this day and age, you'd get laughed at. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, now it's more like meatloaf by the dashboard light.
Yeah, exactly.
Then in the spring of 1841, Mary quits the shop. She tells her boss, John Anderson, that her seafaring older brother, Frederick, had come home from a voyage and bought the boarding house on Nassau Street for his mother.
Yeah.
And since her mother was getting up there in years, Mary decided to give up her position at the shop in order to help with the housework around the boarding house. And as you might imagine, John Anderson wasn't happy.
Yeah.
And neither were the men who frequented the cigar shop.
Yeah.
You can't go, Mary.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? Look at each other?
We might have to start writing again.
Then on Sunday, July 25th, 1841, at 10 a.m., Mary knocked on the door of Daniel's room at the boarding house. When he answers, he's all lathered up with a razor in his hand, and she told him that she was going to spend the day with her aunt, Mrs. Downing, on Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village, or the Village as it's mostly called today.
Yeah.
It's the neighborhood on the west side of Lower Manhattan and is bound by 14th Street to the north, Broadway to the east, Houston Street to the south, and the North River, which is part of the Hudson. And the name comes from Groenwick, which is Dutch for green district. There's not too much green there now.
Yeah.
But 4 zip codes in the village are all ranked among the 10 most expensive real estate in the United States.
Yep. Sure
that was
is.
a long way of saying she was going to see her aunt. But she tells Daniel that she was leaving and to come and get her at 7. And he says to her, quote, "All right, I'll call for you tonight," end quote, meaning I'll come by and pick you up.
Right.
That Sunday was particularly hot, and Daniel visited a number of places for a, quote, cooling drink, end quote. So much so, he's a little tipsy. At 5 p.m., he notices that there's a storm brewing, so he heads home. And as the day turned into night, this huge thunderstorm whipped up, and it was raining and storming hard, and Daniel thought Mary's not going to want to get out in this storm. So he didn't go pick her up because the weather didn't break until around 9 p.m.
He didn't give her a call on his cell phone?
He didn't call her, no way to get to her.
Yeah.
And he tells Mary's mom, "I didn't go get her because of the storm, and Mary didn't come home on her own." But neither of them were worried because she stayed plenty of times with her aunt.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, the storm had passed, and Phoebe Rogers expects Mary to show up at any moment. But she didn't. Daniel was working, and when he gets home for dinner, Mary still isn't home. And when Daniel hears this, he rushes out of the boarding house without eating dinner, which I thought was an interesting fact given in the newspaper. Daniel's on his way to Bleecker Street and to Mrs. Downing's home. So they're like, he got to the house, and when he heard that she wasn't there, he rushed out without his dinner.
Important detail.
Very important detail, apparently, but that was in the newspaper.
Yeah.
But when he arrives, Mary's aunt tells Daniel that Mary had never been to her house the day before. And Phoebe's worried because she remembered Mary's disappearance from before.
Mm-hmm.
But when she left, according to both Phoebe and Daniel, she was wearing very light clothing and a light bonnet. Well, it is July in New York City.
Yeah.
It's brutal.
Yep.
But she wasn't dressed to be gone long, and Daniel suspects the worst. And Phoebe, Mary's mother, is beside herself. And Daniel decides to put a notice in the newspaper, thinking that would bring her back to them. So he rushes off to the office of the New York Sun and ordered a notice to be printed to the effect that Mary Cecilia Rogers was missing and that information as to her whereabouts would be appreciated. So can you imagine? I'm trying to find you're trying to find a friend, so you put a notice in the newspaper.
But if you think about it, back in those days, I mean, that's about the only recourse you have.
Yeah. Now, the second disappearance of Mary caused an even bigger ruckus in the newspapers than the first. On Tuesday, July 27th, no Mary. Then on Wednesday, July 28th, 2 men, James Bullard and Henry Malin, were out fishing off Castle Point in Hoboken, New Jersey, and they see something bobbing up and down in the water. It's a body. They drag it to shore. It's a woman. Her face was beaten and swollen. Around her waist and attached to the top of her skirt was a rope or a cord, which was then fastened to a heavy stone.
Wow.
Whoever put her in the water was weighing her down.
Right.
Around her neck was a piece of torn lace from her dress. It was tied tightly around her neck, like she'd been strangled.
Right.
Around her wrists, there were deep marks where her hands had been tied at one point. She was wearing light kid gloves on her hands and a bonnet hung by its ribbons around her neck. Her dress was torn. Now crowds gather, and an hour later, Alfred Cumlin gets word that this body has washed up, and he rushes to the scene, and he IDs Mary's body. You know, he was a mess, you know.
Sure.
I read in the paper he cried, "Poor Mary," end quote.
Wow.
Dr. Richard Cook of Hoboken declared that she died of asphyxiation due to strangulation because of the lace around her neck. Now, in one source, it said that the investigating physicians revealed that she'd been brutally raped before death. But another source cited that, according to the coroner, she was not pregnant and she had, quote, evidently been a person of chastity and correct habits, end quote.
Okay.
So possibly he was just trying to save her reputation. Maybe. I don't know.
Right.
Because Mary's so well loved. And she's so well loved by all these newspaper men who hung out at the cigar shop. And they and the press start criticizing the police publicly and severely. And the police announce that there's a large reward for anyone who could aid in the arrest and conviction of the killer. And in addition to the reward, this person would have complete immunity and protection, unless you're the killer.
Right.
So they put it out into the paper. If you want to come forward, you get immunity, unless you're the killer. So who's going to come forward and say, I'm the killer?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to come forward and say, I'm the killer.
Oh, man. Okay.
I heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But because they have put this notice in the paper, they start getting information. And one piece of information they get is an anonymous letter that was sent to the coroner by a young man in Hoboken. He said that while walking the Elysian Fields, which is then a summer resort, it's a famous summer resort on Sunday afternoons where people would go.
Right.
He had seen a boat pull out from the New York side containing 6 rough-looking men and 1 well-dressed girl whom he recognized as Mary Rogers. She and the 6 men left the boat on the beach and went into the woods with these men willingly and laughing. And just as they disappeared into the woods, a second boat that came from the New York side was pulled across the river by 3 other handsomely dressed men.
Okay.
And one of them leaps ashore and meets with the other 2 who were waiting. And he asks them, have you seen a young woman and 6 men come in on the boat just a few minutes before? And they said that they had, and they pointed into the woods and in the direction that they went. And then the man asks if they were being violent with her, and they say no. No, she went with them willingly. And when he hears this, he gets back in the boat and he goes back to New York. So the Elysian Fields is on the Jersey side near Hoboken.
Okay.
And all you have to do is cross the river from the city to Jersey. So that's what people would do. They would cross the river from one side to the other on Sundays or on the weekends to like hang out at this Elysian Fields place.
Okay.
They never discover who wrote the letter, but it was printed in the newspapers. And the 2 men who were walking on the beach came forward and said, yeah, this happened. They both knew Mary Rogers by sight and said that the girl who went into the woods resembled her. But they weren't positive that it was her. Can you imagine being so famous for being in a cigar shop that people know who you are?
Obviously, New York wasn't as big as it is now.
She's like the OG influencer.
Yeah, big time. Wow.
On August 2nd, the New York Tribune gave a possible lead, reporting that Mary left home that Sunday and was seen meeting a tall, dark-complexioned young man who was a naval officer at Theater Alley, which was a lane that branched off of Ann Street near Broadway. Now, this isn't Schubert Alley. If you've ever been to New York City and seen a Broadway show, there's an alley they call Broadway Alley or
Right.
Schubert Alley
because
it's in between 44th and 45th Street. But this is between Ann and Beekman Streets in the financial district.
Okay.
It's a long block of cobblestone. It's an alley. And they were seen heading for Barclay Street and the Manhattan end of the Hoboken Ferry.
Got it.
Then a stagecoach driver named Adams waited weeks before coming forward to say that on Sunday, July 28th, he'd seen Mary arrive in Hoboken at the Bulls Ferry, which is an area along the Hudson on the New Jersey side. He sees Mary with a well-dressed man of dark complexion, and these 2 go to a roadhouse near the Elysian Fields known as Nick Mullins. Then there was Joseph Morse, an engraver. He'd been seen taking a young woman to Staten Island on the day of the crime. One of the last things he did before leaving to meet this woman was to beat up his wife. Joe was arrested on August 9th in West Boylston, Massachusetts. When they pick him up, he's shaved his beard. And when he asks what the charge is, they say assault and battery on your wife, to which he replied, quote, "Oh, is that all?" End quote.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gee whiz.
Joseph Morris had really taken a young woman to Staten Island, but once they were there, they missed the last ferry back to the city and had to stay in a hotel room. He tells the police that he never caught the girl's name, but it wasn't Mary. But his girl came forward to the police to say, no, that was me, and I wasn't Mary.
Okay.
So he was off the hook. He was
Right.
just in trouble for beating up his wife. Then on August 11th, Dan Payne, her fiancé, was questioned. Maybe one or the other had threatened to leave, and Dan killed her, either to get rid of her or to prevent her from breaking their engagement. He produced an airtight alibi for his whereabouts during Mary's disappearance, but that didn't stop the New Yorker from suggesting he'd had a hand in Mary's death. Now, remember, he's the one who's just been going from bar to bar because it was a hot day and he needed a cooling drink.
Yeah.
There is one point in Daniel's testimony that's a little hinky. It seems he had been searching for Mary. He's been searching for 2 or 3 days.
Right.
But when he was told on Wednesday night that her body had been found in Hoboken, he did not go to see the body or ask about it and never went to Hoboken when they found her body, even though he'd been there before she was found asking around about her. Mm-hmm. Hinky.
Well, but what was his demeanor? Does anybody talk about that?
Well, I think he was, plus Alfred was there, like pushing people out of the way. Poor Mary. Yeah. But Dan has an alibi, and he was seen all that day drinking at all these different spots in public. Mm-hmm. But what about Alfred? He actually comes clean with some details later. He said that on Friday, July 26th, a note came to his office written in Mary's handwriting. It was an invitation to call on her, but he didn't because his ego was still bruised from the last time he wanted to see her, and she didn't want to see him. He was brutally rebuffed. Then on Saturday, the 27th, he found on the slate outside his door the name Mary Rogers as someone who had come to see him. In the keyhole of his door, he found a bright red rose. And maybe Alfred made all of that up. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I guess if you came to see somebody and you couldn't get in to see them or they weren't there, it's kind of like, when you write on this was before cell phones, but when I was in college, you had a whiteboard on your door at the dormitory, and you just write on that door messages for people.
Right.
So she had written on the slate in chalk.
Gotcha.
One thing the authorities did note was that the cord tied around Mary's waist was tied off with a sailor's knot. Mm. This was significant because they discovered that a sailor named William McCookuck was very anxious to get back to his ship on the evening of July 28th, and William knew Mary, but he hadn't seen her since June. In late September, after Mary's murder, a woman named Frederica Lewes, who owned a tavern called Nick Mullins, her 2 sons went to play in the woods and gather sassafras bark near the beach when they happened upon a secluded clearing where they found a white petticoat, a silk scarf, a parasol, and a linen hanky with the initials M.R. Mm. No one knew what to make of any of this, and many people thought it was from Mary's murder, her initials, M.R., right?
Sure.
Others thought that Frederica had planted them there for publicity and even to get more business into her tavern. But she tells authorities that she too had seen Mary with a dark-complected man drinking lemonade at her stand. She said they strolled off in the direction of the Elysian Fields, which is a wooded retreat that young couples apparently liked to go to. Mm. It was a 700-acre estate and one of the earliest parks in the United States that was developed in the style of an English garden.
It was the early version of Lookout Point.
It was. The ferry would bring as many as 20,000 people to Elysian Fields during the weekends from New York across the Hudson.
Wow.
20,000 people.
That's a lot of people.
I'd want to be the guy rowing the boat, taking the money.
Yeah.
Frederica Lewes said that these two went into the adjoining woods after drinking their lemonade, and soon after she heard a woman's scream. But according to old Frederica, the area was full of questionable characters, and she just heard screaming all the time, and which was just sort of like, oh, well, somebody's unhappy.
Another one bites the dust.
Yeah. Every effort was made to trace the tall, dark-complexioned man who answered the description of the naval officer said to have been seen with Mary during her first disappearance, but without success.
Okay.
It was generally believed at the time that Phoebe, Mary's mother, knew more about her daughter's mysterious dark naval officer admirer than she was saying. 2 weeks after this, Dan Payne, Mary's fiancé, was facing scrutiny and was drinking heavily and acting erratic. He went to Sybil's cave and committed suicide by drinking laudanum. The bottle was found beside him. Again, the coroner's report said that he had succumbed to, quote, irregular living, exposure, and an aberration of the mind, end quote, which is 1840 speak for he was knuckin' futs.
Yeah, exactly.
And this raised even more suspicions about him. He left a note saying, quote, may God forgive me for my misspent life, end quote. There was no evidence that he had anything to do with the murder. And I think he kind of died of a broken heart with an assist from, the laudanum.
Right.
So their theories are a gang that got violent. Witnesses see Mary get on this boat with the 6 men and then go into the woods. Frederica's kids find the clothes 2 months later. No one is ever charged. Then there's this idea that John Anderson, Mary's wealthy and once upon a time boss, he faced accusations that he was the one who arranged the abortion to avoid a scandal. So they're thinking she was pregnant, and
right.
So that's why she's gone off or
was she
whatever.
Pregnant by the sailor?
Or was the sailor there to make her unpregnant, to give her an abortion? And this, they thought that he had arranged all of this because he didn't want a scandal with his cigar girl. And this was kind of partially after Mary's murder. He went right back to work and never offered to cough up any of his money to offer a reward. So after everything she had done for him, when she's gone and then she washes up on shore, he's like,
yeah,
that's,
got to find me another Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The case remained a mystery. Then just a year later, in October of 1842, Frederica Lewes, the woman whose sons found the hanky, and she said she saw Mary with the dark stranger.
Right.
One of her sons accidentally shot her. Accidentally shot his mother.
Jeez.
And on her deathbed, she confessed that Mary Rogers had come to her tavern with a young physician for a, quote, premature delivery, end quote, which was a euphemism for abortion.
Right.
According to Frederica, the procedure went wrong and Mary died. Frederica said Mary's body was disposed of in the river and her clothing was scattered in the woods by one of her sons. Now, this confession shifted public and press opinion, moving suspicion away from theories of gang violence or random murder and toward the possibility of a botched abortion. Newspapers like the Tribune seized on Frederica's account, declaring the mystery solved and attributing Mary's death to provincial agency, end quote.
Okay.
However, Frederica's confession did not fully align with the physical evidence, as Mary's body showed signs of a struggle that were not explained by the abortion story. So think about it. She was either there's no way they bound her wrists for an abortion.
Sure.
This shifted the direction of the Mary Rogers investigation by introducing the theory that Mary died during a botched abortion rather than as a victim of gang violence or random murder. Before Frederica's confession, authorities and the public largely blamed a gang of hoodlums based on her son's reports of seeing suspicious men and hearing a woman scream near their Hoboken roadhouse the night Mary disappeared. This gang theory became the accepted explanation for a year. And despite the confession's impact on public opinion and the press, police dismissed it as a hoax. They're like, that Frederica,
really?
She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Wow.
And the magistrate to whom Frederica allegedly confessed later stated it was not credible. Nevertheless, the abortion theory became a lasting part of the case's lore, fundamentally changing how the public and later historians viewed the unsolved murder of Mary. When Mary's case went cold, it shone a light on the NYPD's fledgling police force that was reliant upon untrained men who would bungle evidence and couldn't secure convictions.
What was their point? Jeez.
Mary's case was the catalyst for the Police Reform Act that was passed in New York in 1845, which professionalized and modernized the NYPD.
Really?
It was one of 2 laws that were passed because of Mary's murder, the other law being criminalizing abortion. Now, despite the multitude of theories and intense public interest, none were ever proven, and Mary Rogers' murder remains unsolved to this day. Now, the media came roaring back to this story when Edgar Allan Poe wrote The Mystery of Marie Roget. It was his first detective story based on actual events. It's based on Mary.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Poe transposes the case to Paris, changing the victim's name to Marie and making her a perfume shop assistant, but otherwise the case closely follows the real details of the Rogers case.
Ah, okay.
It's just like
A Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men. Yeah. Poe's using the real story, just like Aaron Sorkin did.
Right.
The story features Poe's detective, Auguste Dupin. Yeah, it's all French, who previously appeared in The Murders in the Rue Morgue. And when the body of Marie Roget is found floating in the river, in the Parisian press and police are baffled by the circumstances of her death. The newspapers speculate wildly, suggesting various suspects and motives, but failed to reach a consensus. Dupin, employing his signature method of logical reasoning, reviews the facts as reported in the press and systematically dismantles the prevailing theories. He analyzes the physical evidence and eyewitness accounts, ultimately concluding that Marie was likely murdered by a single individual, not a gang, as many believe. This is all in the book, by the way. This is what I'm talking about.
Right.
He also points out inconsistencies in the press reports and uses logical deduction to reconstruct the probable sequence of events. In the story, the mystery, just like Mary's murder, is never solved. Mary Cecilia Rogers is buried in Manhattan's Marble Cemetery. There's no marker for her grave. Today, most lean toward the idea of a botched abortion, but the truth died back then with Mary.
Yeah.
So what are your theories? I mean, it could have been anything. She's seen with all these different people. She's widely known, but it seems like everybody wanted to have a theory so they could be in the newspaper.
Sure.
Everybody wanted their 10 seconds of fame.
Yeah. It was the Instagram of the 1800s.
Yeah, it was the influencer who died,
Right.
and then it's just a scandal online.
Sure.
But that is the 134-year-old murder case of Mary Rogers, the Cigar Girl. And that's all I have to say about that. For nearly 7 years, Jane Doe has lived in the shadows, her past buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and silence. After completing more than was asked of her in her last assignment for the enigmatic Kywolf Project, Jane Doe vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of dead bodies and unanswered questions. But now, as the specter of her past returns with a vengeance, Jane finds herself thrust back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. When her former sins come knocking on her door, Jane is faced with an impossible choice: continue to hide in the shadows, or once again take up arms against the forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of society. With enemies lurking around every corner and allies who may not be what they seem, Jane must rely on her wits, training, and her unyielding determination to survive. And while trust is a luxury she cannot afford, Jane must confront the truth about herself and her past. As the clock ticks, she realizes that the line between family, friend, and foe are razor thin, and in the end, the only person she can rely on is herself. Jane Doe 4 Charlotte is available September 24th, 2024. No name, no regrets, no mercy.
Okay, my take on this whole thing is, I mean, there's so many moving parts to this story.
Yeah.
But the one part of it that seems to keep coming up is the dark figure and the sailor.
Yeah.
So.
And did she see him twice? Was she pregnant twice? Because she leaves for a week the first time. She comes back. She's not in a very good mood.
Yeah.
And her mom seemed to know more about what was going on. So were she and Danny doing more than just making out in the hallway and she was getting pregnant? Or what was going on?
Yeah. And that whole thing of seeing her going into the woods with those 6 men.
Yeah.
I mean, Yeah, they're just...
Why would she go into the woods with 6 men?
And was it her? I mean...
And was that even her?
Yeah.
And what about Frederica?
Yeah.
I feel like, if you've been shot by your son, you got nothing to lose to tell the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Because she did die, so...
Wow. Well, once again, another perfect crime.
Another perfect crime.
Yeah.
I don't like doing the ones that don't have a
I know you don't.
good ending. And I've kind of been on a roll lately, but I promise next week somebody's going to jail.
Well, I'm going to intervene and we'll do some stupid crimes that do have some endings with a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right, number 1, just a heads up.
A heads up.
Yep. A Marion County man made good on his promises when he told a responding deputy, quote, "You better have your doors locked. I like to steal cars." Moments later, here it comes. Moments later, he hopped into the deputy's cruiser and took off, kicking off a chase through the county. The joyride ended with a pit maneuver. And if you don't know what a pit maneuver is, that's where the cops will take their car and hit the back end of the other one and force it off the road. A pit maneuver and the suspect in cuffs, providing he wasn't bluffing about his car stealing tendencies.
I mean, that's like a shoplifter saying,
Yeah.
"You better have tags on all this stuff because I like to take stuff out the front door."
Exactly. The deputies shared the incident, reminding everyone that some warnings should be taken very, very seriously.
Amen.
There you go. All right, number 2. This is your time out.
Okay.
Orlando, Florida. You know how we like the Florida ones.
We love Florida.
Yeah. A woman spent Tuesday walking in front of an Orlando police headquarters holding a sign apologizing for assaulting a police officer.
Oh, bless her heart.
Well, the woman agreed to the unusual punishment as a part of a no contest plea on 2 misdemeanor charges.
2, okay.
Yeah. Not 1, but 2. The woman arrived at 2 p.m. to give the 4-hour public apology. Alexandra Espinoza Amaya was not picketing and not protesting. She's being taught a lesson. She, quote, said, "I think it's a bit dumb, don't you think?" She told Eyewitness News. The sign she carried is part of the 24-year-old woman's punishment, a public apology for pushing an Orlando police officer.
She probably hated that. She probably would have just rather spent a week in jail
Yeah, exactly.
than do that.
Quote, "I don't think it's very fair," Espinoza Amaya told Eyewitness News.
Now I'm glad she was carrying it.
Wah. So there's your dumb criminals, bless your heart.
I want to know what her sign said. Was it like, "I will not push an Orlando police officer. I will not push an Orlando police officer."
Yeah, it's like Bart Simpson.
Oh, yeah. It's like when we went to school and, kids got paddled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Making her carry the sign.
Yeah.
I'm dying to know. I bet it just says, "I'm sorry, officer," whatever, for pushing you. I won't do it again.
I will never push officer such and such again. Whatever.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody who's carrying a picket sign outside of a police officer or police headquarters,
don't laugh and point.
Don't push a police officer.
Yeah.
All you got to do is go to hitchedtohomicide.com. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us about your brush with true crime.
Sure.
That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.